So it's 1:30, and we're going to start with our session on reterritorialization in the Yucatan. That's the name that we have. So my name is Schneider. I'm a professor at Rutgers University. We are organizing this session, joining with Fernanda Figueroa from Universidad Autónoma de México, Facultad de Ciencias, Mariana Benitez from Lancis, also at UNAM, and Leonardo Calzada at Rutgers University. And the idea of this session is to really be able to bring people that have been working for quite a while in the region, in the Yucatan, and sort of like try to understand these new, very interesting dynamics that are occurring in terms of public policy, development, conservation, and how they are actually having a effect on the landscape. I think the fact that we've been thinking about this place for a while and we have seen all these different changes that are occurring. We are just showing you here a video of the Tren Maya and some of the effects that it's having and some of the parcelas and areas where people actually work. So we wanted to explore some of those dynamics, and we're having kind of discussions about the implications of these ways, of these different aspects that I just mentioned in terms of territory, in terms of just bringing governance, bringing what people are doing on the ground, but also trying to connect to the ecologies of the peninsula. So I'm really glad that we have a really group of experts today. We're going to be talking about Tren Maya, that from some of you probably has been in your radar, and there are some things that probably you would like to discuss. And we're going to see how these have consequences not only for people but also for biodiversity, and how the region is not just one, but actually the opposite is quite heterogeneous. So saying that, I would like to introduce our first speaker today, Leonardo Calzada. He will be doing our first talk, and he will be talking about heterogeneous landscapes and forest degradation. So one thing, the talks will be around 12 minutes. I hope that we can have time for questions, probably one, but we might have to be short just not to go and cut the time of the other speakers. So welcome everybody, and I hope that this is productive, and hopefully we'll have interesting discussions as we have the presenters here. So bienvenidos. Y Leonardo, bienvenido.
Thank you very much. Thanks for being here. Such an honor to, break the dancing floor, and let's struggle together with lunch. So for today, I will present about the heterogeneous landscape in the southern Yucatan. And really, the moral of this presentation is to motivate this reflection about how we need to understand the landscape as a result, and particularly the forest dynamics as a result of land use legacies and different land management practices and strategies that are always in transformation, not just physically speaking, like the way in which people manage territory, but also you will see in the rest of the table is about politics, governance, assemblages, and so on. So it goes beyond one dimension. So, in this first photo, it's kind of supporting the video, you can see how diverse this landscape is. Actually, you have, a Sembrando Vida plot just over there that is actually intersected and cutting by the Maya train, but actually you can see in the rest of the photo, some forested areas, but also some plots that are clear for, produce pastures and milpas and so on. So as you can deduct on the name of the table, the study site is the Yucatan Peninsula. Particularly, we are working in 6 municipalities in the Yucatan Peninsula between the Calakmul corridor, and the Siancan, which is, like these huge protected areas. But the idea of this map is to show you a little example of the diversity and the heterogeneous landscape we are facing. Actually, you can see two different types of vegetation, but something that is not on the map, because it's pretty difficult to get, is like every single part of forest is in different successional stage. So actually you have like forest from 30 years old, 60 years old, 1 year old. So all this matrix is actually, is not a snapshot, it's a dynamic process. And of course, you have, like the juxtaposition of development intervention like the Maya train that is, like just cutting across the territory in this red line. And the same with Sembrando Vida, that is these tiny black dots, no? So actually we need to start thinking about how this landscape is always in conversation and in interaction with different negotiations, with different interventions, and so on. So the project overall, the overarching project, is actually divided in 3 parts. So the first part centers that I will present today for the sake of time. So I will present what is happening in terms of changes in forest cover, but actually in the rest of the project we are discussing and engaging with people on the local communities about like development and conservation and how they envision the change in the future using Q methodologies, interviews, and actually we are, like trying to problematize the discourses more than, like the classic environmental protection or the statist developmentalism. We are actually, like exploring more and less explore positionalities. But let's talk just about forest and what is happening in relation to Sembrando Vida. So, I will try to reinforce this idea about thinking in landscape as an heterogeneous and a dynamic space. So actually, again, you have a Sembrando Vida plot, but actually you can see how the borders of this plot are, like less clear across the time. Actually, you have right on the middle, on the top, the sistema agroforestal, the agroforestry system. On the down part, you have the milpa intercalada con árboles frutales. The milpa is, like traditional agriculture with fruit trees, papaya and others. And on the left part, you have, like an empty plot that is ready to be part of the milpa or the Sembrando Vida, but also you have a forestry plot that was, like started by the Giratario. And also you have Quelenche, like this forest that is not super old, is between 10 and 20 years old, and is ready to be, like in this dynamic of land management as part of the plot, as part of the Sembrando Vida, as part of the milpa. So we need to think how these public policies are actually being embedded on the land management practices and on the conversations of the campesinos and the giratarios, no? Oh my God. So, just a little bit of theory. Usually the transition we imagine is like we have this old growth forest and later secondary forest, and we are losing biomass, like just due to the activities, no? And on some cases, like due to the grasslands or the pastures, we lost all the biomass. But actually what we see in terrain is this plethora of different trends. So we don't have one trend or the other. There is actually like this interaction in which we have, like more and less biomass across time. And of course, public policies motivate like a regime shift. And it's not just physically, again, you will see in the rest of the presentations. It's about policy, it's about politics, it's about governance assemblages. So we need to think, like how this forest is changing across time. And actually, like people is very conscious about, they have like different ways of understanding the forest beyond the primary versus secondary understanding of forest, no? They have Quelenche, Hupche, Sakab, no? So we need to think, like how people understand forest. So for doing this, we are using a remote sensing method. We are using MBR. I will, like just speak a little bit, but it's a time series analysis in which we detect the anomalies across time in every single pixel on the territory. So basically using this, we can detect these anomalies, detect in which year it is happening, the duration of the disturbance, and the magnitude. So this is the most important part. We will analyze the magnitude, how intense is this anomaly, and the duration, which is, like how many years we have between the disturbance event development and the recovery of vegetation. So pretty much, like you can have like a temporal and an spatial terms of the different forest change across territory. No, so we have different magnitudes, pretty much, like the Menonita fields in Opelchen, of course, the Maya train across the territory, the effects of the Hurricane Dean in 2007, and of course, like every single pixel has their own behavior. For example, you have on the back part, on the bottom, the industrial agriculture on Salamanca Ejido is a Menonita plot that was transformed 10 years ago, roughly, and is still, like not recovering the biomass. And you can compare it with the Sweden agriculture processes in the top of the plot that is actually, like fluctuating in biomass levels. So actually, we were able to, using random forest classification, to detect different disturbance processes and their response on vegetation. So using this magnitude and duration of the pixels, we detect how, like selective logging, wind throw disturbances, hurricanes, fires, grazing, droughts, and land use change actually have their own particular behavior in terms of magnitude and duration of degradation. So with this, like we were able to calculate, like how the space is changing across time. So, like in this plot, basically the most important part is like you can see different disturbances across time. Of course, the effect of the Hurricane Dean in 2007, and you can actually, like start to make connections with the start of the implementation of Sembrando Vida in 2019 and the construction of the Maya train in 2020. So you actually can see, like how wind throw disturbances are still present, but now certain types of disturbances like fire and land use change are becoming more and more relevant in the recent years. So, just to give you an idea how this looks in kind of real color, on the right top we have, like the new airport of Tulum. On the back, on the bottom part, we have the effects of the hurricane. I select the pixels just to make this more evident. Later you have Salamanca Ejido, which is a Menonita Ejido that are now producing sorgo and soybean close to Bacalar. And later you have, like this heterogeneity that is, I would say, the rule across the territory. And I just take the example of a community close to Calakmul, no? So, but again, we need to think about that this actually is, like kind of fluctuating and changing across time. And again, we have different types of disturbances in interaction. So what we did to understand this is how it is, like how we can relate these changes in magnitude and duration on the pixels and understand as a changes in structure and composition of vegetation. So here you just have an example with biomass, and we did a segmented regression just to understand how different magnitudes can be correlated with levels of biomass. So again, the moral here is every single characteristic in a structure of forest is the result of land use legacy and the different disturbance regimes across the territory. So you can see, for example, how, like the more magnitude you have, the lowest biomass levels you will see. So we create like this kind of index to detect and to correlate the magnitude with different levels of degradation. So we create these 4 levels: low degradation, moderate degradation, and high degradation. And like how these relate with, like a proof of concept. We are using this very index, the degradation index, to understand the impacts and the dynamics in the landscape that Sembrando Vida is generating. So, I think you already heard a lot about this public policy, but it's basically the flagship policy of the current government and the last one, and it's about tackling rural poverty and environmental degradation. Again, there is a lot of people participating across the territory, and basically, it's super important just in terms of money. You can see, like how Sembrando Vida kind of, like just overcome the money that the government is using for other public programs like PCA, conservation areas, even Procampo, that used to be one of the most relevant public policies in Mexico. And of course, like the Maya train is huge, but still both quantities are amazing, no? And Sembrando Vida looks like that on territory, you know, like people is creating, thank you, these community forest nurseries, these agroforestry systems, these meal paths that I mentioned. And of course, you know, like we are just testing if we see differences, not just for, you know, like saying the problem is working or not. Again, the moral is Sembrando Vida is being embedded on the current land tenure practices and the current land tenure discussions and the current, you know, like land use practices. So basically what we can see is this change on trend across time, and where the heroes that are participating in Sembrando Vida have a distinct pattern of forest degradation. In this case, exhibit, you know, like a decrease at the very end of the process, but this is not considering the effect of the Maya trend. So I'm not saying that Sembrando Vida is completely curving, you know, like the degradation trends, but again, the idea is in connection and in conversation with the current land use practices, no? So the idea is we need to put attention on the different practices, on the different policies, on the different governance discussions, and finally, you know, like on the ideas people have around the future of the ejidos and the forest, and on the changes of disturbance effects. So just, you know, like a little bit of figures across time and across the analysis, we observe around like 16% of affected area, which is actually doubling the national estimate in terms of deforestation. So I'm just pushing the idea that we need to start thinking beyond, you know, like this binary classification of forest, non-forest, and start thinking about like forest change in a more subtle way, which is the way in which people manage the forest, no? They play with these different succession processes and the effects of different disturbance regimes. And pretty much, you know, like that, we produce, you know, like this document, kind of collecting the ideas. You can, you know, like chat with me or scan this if you are curious. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Sorry, I called you out because I thought that we might have 1 minute for one question, if anybody has that. Of course.
No bias here. Thank you so much, Leo. I've been waiting a long time for this presentation, and you did not disappoint. I do have a very fundamental question about the definition, right, of degradation, and I kind of have some insight into it because I saw yesterday's session too. So I was wondering if you could speak to not just, you know, primarily you highlighted the biomass recovery or biomass loss, right, as kind of the main factor in the definition of degradation. Could you speak to the functional diversity and perhaps compositional diversity element of that as well? And does the picture look exactly the same if you switch up the definition?
No, actually, that's the important part of degradation. It depends the way you frame degradation, you will see like different results. So for that reason, we are not saying, oh, Sembrando Vida is actually curving degradation. The problem with that is, for example, a common pattern is on plots that are under management, you have certain types of plants, like salam, which is, you know, like a legume, no? And they grow like super fast, they produce like super fast biomass, they are actually very successful, but they kind of, you know, like produce these salamales, no? You have a lot of salam that actually arrest succession. So you need to play, you know, like with functional diversity and how they play, you know, like with the process of colonization of other species, which is not there. That's totally true. So we are about, you know, like a start to including, you know, like compositional changes. And well, perhaps I'm in conversation to include also like functional attributes using like remote sensing. But as you can imagine, it takes, you know, like some time and play.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Leo. Yeah. So thanks for the question. Okay, so we are going to our second presenter today. Is Dr. Luciana Porter. I think you're the second, yes? Sorry. I mean, yeah. And she is going to talk about socio-ecological conflicts in the region. And you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay.
Okay, so good afternoon. I'm going to tell you about some of the results of a recently conducted project about socio-ecological conflict in the Yucatan Peninsula. So
This was a collaborative project. So for it, we formed a collective of people not only from the academia, but also from also with people from indigenous communities, from NGOs, and from the civil society. And we formed Tejedores de Territorios, and we were focused on specific conflicts. No? The conflicts that we chose were related to what part of the people from Tejedores de Territorio were living. So today I'm going to briefly tell you about 3 of these cases. I'm also going to present you a little bit of the processes that we found that propel or that sustain these conflicts, and a bit of the context. So I'm not going to talk about the train or Sembrando Vida. So the first one is an ejido, Blancaflor, which is in the municipality of Bacalar, in the south of Quintana Roo, part of the area that Leonardo talked to us about. Here, the UIMCRO, la Universidad Intercultural Maya de Quintana Roo, who is part of Tejedores de Territorio, works with Cabijabín, which is a 30-year-old sorry for my English, beekeepers organization that exports honey. They have been experiencing very fast land use change because of the agro-industrial frontier. Mennonite communities that have been establishing there since the beginning of the century are, in the last 3-4 years, really expanding. So even we cannot see it in the map because they have already bought the land, and we're going to see the deforestation this year, the next year, the year after that. And of course, the Cabijabín has been experiencing problems with beekeeping, not only because of deforestation, but because of massive deaths, because of the use of agrochemicals. And well, they are in danger of losing their organic certification for exporting honey that they work very hard to get. So the second case is in the Poniente Yucatan, the northwestern Yucatan. Here, Chiquinja, who is also part of Tejedores de Territorio, have been experiencing the effects of a mega farm for raising pigs that was established there since 10 years ago. And today it harbors 6 sheds containing up to 49,000 pigs. I forgot 3 important zeros. The farm is in unclean tenure. Actually, Chiquinja is failing, is under litigation for the land. People there are experiencing water and soil contamination, but also their livelihood subsystems. They're also beekeepers, and they already lost the organic certificate, among other cultural transgressions and other problems. The third case is Anacat, for which we work together with Eugene Loom, Emma, that is here, and we have seen a historical weakening of governance in general, but we are focusing on water governance. So here, the state has complete control of water supply, water concessions, water monitoring, and the operation even of the village water bodies. There is a complete lack of information for the local people regarding the concessions, regarding their rights, water quality, and institutional functioning. This leads to poor capacities for facing global change in many aspects, tourism, climate, etc. And their current condition is that they have threats to food security, they experience drinking water shortages, and the water is polluted. No? There are also farms near there. So what have we learned about, about what is facilitating this process? One is, well, these are ejidos. How is land being grabbed? What is the process of land grabbing or despojo de la tierra? Not only the way Mennonites are expanding, but also the farms, the pig farms, and also other processes that I haven't talked about, like the real estate industry that is really generating conflict. And what we found is that within the agrarian law of the ejidos, there are legal constituencies such as the usufruct contracts and entitlement transfers that facilitate this process. These constituencies are made to make stronger the ejido, but actually there is a malpractice of these constituencies, and they are helping land grabbing, no? And the process of tenure change very fast. Of course, orchestrated by other actors such as lawyers, the government, the Registro Agrario Nacional, etc. The other issue that we have seen is how underwater concessions is being assigned. Of course, the pig farms, we found that the one that we work in, this one, is only one, but there are many in Yucatan, in other parts of the peninsula, and in other parts of Mexico. We learned that the meat industry Mexico is of the 4th country that exports honey, not honey, pigs. And to have pigs, you don't need a lot of space, but you need a lot of water. So we are seeing that the underwater availability in the Yucatan is going down, but in the last 20 years, the extraction has been going up, mostly assigned to pigs race, to livestock raising, 50%, only accounting for 10 owners, and 44 to agriculture, but this may also be for the pigs. So what we're finding here is a context of very power imbalances. So we see that the problem of the pig is not only a conflict between an industry and a community, but it's actually a development strategy, no, with many powers. Also, these powers include academia, because UNAM, WADI, CC, Centro Geo, and all of the other institutions are working for Quequén. Quequén is the company that raises the pigs. So we are in this great context of power imbalances, and we also see that we are in a context of marginalization and vulnerability. I don't have time to give you the story of Sanacat, because I have to finish soon, but there is a historical weakening of governance. We can only say that this is the polygon. In the polygon, you can see these like little perfect cats. So when there was the reparto agrario, they respected the haciendas. So people went from working for the haciendas to working for the states that were the same people as the haciendas. And this is just an example, but that tells us about this marginalization and vulnerability context, no? That facilitates all the other things that I am talking about. So for concluding, we see here the scenario of multifactorial aspects at different spatiotemporal scales that lead to a contested territoriality. Just the last month, other collectives claimed that the Yucatan Peninsula was declared, the Yucatan Peninsula, in an environmental emergency. We have to question the role of institutions, not only the government, but of academia, backing up these powers. There is a very important role in agrarian issues, not only because it's facilitating all this process, but because there is no connection of agrarian law to environmental law. And we, of course, the governance has to be strengthened, community livelihoods have to be reinforced, and I finish just asking what should the role of academia, of science be in all this situation. So, thank you very much. I want to escape.
And no, don't escape. Thank you, Luciana. Anybody? We have time for a question or two. Anybody? Okay. Leo has one.
Luciana, I have questions around the pork farms. Now, like there is like a growing interest on, like giving the possible connections with new markets across the whole Yucatan, not just because of the Maya train, it's a lot of people migrating to the area. So I'm just hearing your thoughts about, like these new iterations and the effects of the pork farms on the future in the Yucatan.
The question if it's related to new market? Yes, all the meat of these farms are mostly for export. Although the Yucatan Peninsula eats a lot of pork, it is not coming from these farms. No? So these farms are filling this, ¿cómo se dice? This, like, this demand that has had Mexico. Actually, the pig farm were mostly in other parts of Mexico, but because of water problems, they recently, in the last 20 years, which is not much, moved to the Yucatan, but they are still there. Esteve?
Luciana, muchas gracias. ¿Nos podrías contar si la expansión de las granjas de cerdo va acompañado también de algún tipo de cambio en los sistemas de agricultura? Porque en España lo que ha pasado es que los campesinos han empezado a adoptar mucho más maíz para el engorde de cerdos transgénico y también a cortar los ciclos de rotación entre maíz y otros cultivos para producir más maíz para la industria del cerdo.
Pues qué pregunta más interesante, porque nadie sabe qué comen esos cerdos. Sí, there has not been a change on food systems for... Yeah, so he asked, sí. Emma.
El cambio del primer sector a tercer sector, ¿no? O sea, mucha de la gente que producía alimento en realidad se está empleando en las granjas. Entonces está produciendo menos alimento a nivel local. Eso creo que sí se puede como ver de manera más.
¿Quieres decir algo? No. Muy bien. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Luciana. Thanks so much. Okay, so we're continuing with our talks. Thanks so much. So our next presenter is, sorry, exacto, gracias. Our next presenter is Camila Monroy. She's coming from Facultad de Ciencias de la Universidad Autónoma de la UNAM, trabajando con la doctora Fernanda Figueroa, and she's going to be talking about conservation in the region, so another dimension.
Hi everyone, my name is Camila, I'm a master student and I'm presenting my preliminary results that are from part of a great research effort to understand different territorial dynamics in the study area. So I began talking about the carbon offset projects like a recent strategy for the mitigation of climate change, for the reduction of forest loss and biodiversity loss that is imposed by different institutional, international, like the United National Convention of Climate Change, and also is marked down the general law of climate change here in Mexico. But this strategy is about generating financial mechanisms and systems to compensate both of industry and forest owners about the reduction of emission of GEI and on the other hand, to the reduction of forest loss. But also there is in terms of markets and financiarization of goods and also of ecological dynamics. So we think that it's important to think about how those projects transform territorial dynamics and transform local governance systems. So for that, we part from the conceptual framework. There is a neoliberal conservation and also environmental governance and reterritorialization. And like the link between this theoretical framework is thinking about a carbon offset project is about to commodify different ecological processes such as the biochemical carbon cycle and the dynamics of degradation and regeneration of forests. Also, this is with new actors that are carrying out different responsibilities that were from the states, and this is implemented on the territory, and they are creating new types of system values, also new dynamics for control access of the territory, and also like the management of the territory is changing. So the general objective of my research effort is to understand the process of reterritorialization and reconfiguration of local governance that is driven by carbon offset projects in 3 ejidos of the Calakmul-Siancán corridor. So the study area is Calakmul-Siancán corridor, where are different ecosystems that are priority for the conservation, such as tropical dry forest, or semi-evergreen tropical dry forest, and also it has a huge and long tradition of conservation and management of forest that is mixed with a different kind of land use, such as agriculture and forestry, and also the ejidos there have an economic diversification. And in that terms, ejido is still being an important institution of land control. So this kind of area is very interesting about these topics, and it's in this area that my research effort was done. And I focus on ejidos of Laguna Om. There is here Álvaro Obregón, Campeche. There is near in the Calakmul biosphere, and there Petcacab, there is near of the Mayan zone of Felipe Carrillo Puerto. And it's representing 3 schemes of carbon offset projects, so that become more interesting also. Of my methods, we do a documental revision, and my fieldwork consists on I did a 40 semi-interview, 40 semi-structure interview to different actors, such as ejidatarios, autoridades ejidales, and also people from project developers and other organizational or civil society organizations. Also, I did a participation observation, and we collaborate on participatory workshops. So my preliminary results is about a scheme that represents the operation of one of the 3 phases of the carbon offset project. The first phase is about geospatial analysis of deforestation. The second one is territorial implementation, that is represented here. The whole scheme is about that. And the third one, a huge phase of this kind of projects, is about the selling carbon offsets. So to understand the implementation of this kind of project, we have to start with certifiers. There are actors which principal objective is to sell certify carbon offsets. And to do that, they elaborate a huge socio-technical instrument that is the base of the huge project. There is the Forest Protocol. This is so important because it generates two questions, two processes. On one hand, we have platforms opening, and on the other hand, we have the project definition. So for the platforms opening, we have two kinds of it. In one hand, we have investment platforms, and the other hand, we have new actors platforms. In the new actors platforms, we have two important actors. There is verifiers and project developers. The verifiers, they have to evaluate the quality of the data that is collected in fieldwork and in the hills. And the project developers are the actor who has to implement the Forest Protocol. So the Forest Protocol is the base of the project, and then is the definition of that project and the whole phases that have to be implemented to the ejido can produce and sell its carbon credits. So the definition of the project, I think there are three huge areas of the definition. First, we have a conceptual framework and conditions for ejidos to be part of these kind of projects. Second, we have the definition of the methods of the data collection, of the evaluation and calculation of carbon offsets. And third, we have a territorial reorganization that is defined in the protocol forestal. So when you can do everything of that, the certifiers can verify its carbon offsets and sell. Then I mapped the actors that are involved in carbon offsets projects and in terms of territorial expansion and territorial incidence. I found more or less 5 actors nucleotides. That one is ejidos actors with letter A. With letter C, we have like the dynamic of cell carbon offsets. With letter D, we have the certifier that is in the territory, that is climate reserve action. And with letter B, we have the main actors that are the project developers. These project developers, in terms of relationships, establish relation with ejidos, with certifiers, and with voluntary carbon markets, but they engage with the protocol forestal that is elaborated in letter D. In letter D is a climate action reserve that, with collaboration with another with another governmental institutions and ONGs, they elaborate the forestal protocol. And to be part of this kind of project, the ejidos have to sign different agreements for a long-term years, between 30 to 100 years, to be part of this kind of projects. So the main, key of these maps are the project developers that implement the protocol forestal that is elaborated there. It's important to see that the certifiers are the actors who have the major territorial expansion, and the major incidence in the territory. Although ejido has a huge control of on land, in comparison of the land that is controlled by the certifier higher. And it's important also to say that project developers can be actors such as companies, non-governmental organization, and also consultories. So there are a very huge diversity of actors. And then I think about in terms of power, in terms of making decision, information, and capital. And the power is concentrated there in letter D and in letter B, in the certifiers and in the project developers. That the project developers sold the carbon offsets in the voluntary carbon, and they can gain with the carbon offsets price, and they manage all the information data that is collected in fieldwork by local people, and they evaluate and calculate the carbon offsets with equations that they defined. Yeah, and here doesn't have any manage on the data. So that is implemented in the territory in that way. Yeah. So the project established a projected area, and under the project area there are activities area that are engaged with some specific plant management that could be enhanced forest management, reforestation, restoration, etc. And they are engaged with environmental safeguards that are conditions and care that the ejido has to do to maintain the productions of carbon offsets, because the objective is to increase the production of carbon offsets. So there are different kind of conditions y castigos to the ejidos if they don't maintain the goal of the carbon offsets projects. So if it's not enough problematic questions, there are other asymmetrical relations in that kind of projects that I think there are multiple dimensions in terms of local workforce knowledge, because to the data collection is necessary the knowledge of territory, and generally the people that are collecting the data are young people that it doesn't belong to the ejido, so they don't receive the benefits of carbon offsets. On the other hand, about the information distribution, although the ejido is the actor that are obtaining and collected the data, those information doesn't stay in the ejido. They is managed by project developers and the certifiers. Finally, I saw a different dynamics imposed by ejidos to create a new kind of actors and organs that are evaluating and reflection about the implications, territorial implications of carbon offsets. An important question that I want to emphasize is there is a lack of transparency and lack of engagement for the certifiers and for project developers. Also, the ejidos has a lot of conditions and long-term conditions to become part or be part of these kind of projects. So, yeah, and maybe that could be all for now. Yeah, I want to acknowledge to Leonardo and Alejandro to help me to my fieldwork and my research team, and the people who shared to me their knowledge and experience about carbon offsets.
So we have time for one question before our next.
Thanks so much. Very interesting presentation. I just wanted to ask if you could elaborate a little bit more about the penalties that the communities would be subject to if they don't perform. Because I'm assuming that has to do with the initial project design, and it sounds like it's not integrated with land use management principles.
Yeah.
So if you could just talk a little bit about that, and also if in your mind, if there is a different way to organize projects to actually serve community needs, or do you see that as something that's impossible under current frameworks?
Okay. Yeah. The consequences for the ejido are diverse. In terms of land management, there are different kind of punishments. On one hand, we have like works such as reforestation. If the ejido don't maintain the cover, si no mantienen el 5% de cobertura forestal, no van a tener que reforestar por al menos 6 años. Esa es una de las sanciones. Otra de las sanciones pues también es en términos de dinero, porque certifiers reward a percentage of the carbon offsets capital if the hill has a fire or hurricane or something that degrades the most part of the area. So the certifiers just keep the money that in reality belongs to the hill. So, but it doesn't like show like that. The certifiers just show that it's an caja de ahorro to be implemented of any case of disturbance. So there are many also in terms of agreements. If a hill just assign an agreement for 30 years, the price of the carbon offset could be lower if the hill assign an agreement for 100 years. So in that terms, also they manipulate a little to the hills. And yeah, I think maybe it could be these examples to punishments to a hero. And there are also like insistence dynamics from developers projects or projects developers to enforce the hero to accept and sign agreements without the complete information and implication for its territorial management and for this territorial control, like in long-term terms, no? And also, there is say that carbon offset projects impulse and improve the sustainable development at this local scale, but there are no plans of development, and there is just like a capital interest, and there are no like community process to defining what to improve and what is needed and how to improve their conditions. No, it's just like you can organize and you have this money and so. And one important thing to reflect is that ejidos receive money, but when you compare the money that is like distributed across the actors, is a little part of it. No, so in that terms, our benefits distribution is unequal, no? And just in some cases, because ejidos are the actor that is more engaged to plan management and to in long terms for the industry can keep in its productivity.
Muchas gracias, Camila. Thank you. Sorry. So you can give this to Sophie. You're next. So our next presenter is Sophie Calme. Yeah, here's the pointer. She's coming from Ecosur Chetumal and Sherbrooke in Canada, Toronto. And she's going to talk about biodiversity and some reflections regarding the Tren Maya.
So thank you. I was invited here as a biologist, and so I'm not going to present results of a particular project, and it's more a reflection of what we've been doing over the past 5 years, observing what was occurring in the region and based on what we know from previous studies and also in the literature. So. Okay, why doesn't it work? Oh, yeah. Okay, so we're 4 here, and well, I'm the one in front, but we're 4 people, and what is interesting, we have different perspectives. So I'm the biologist, and Birgit is a human ecologist working on livelihoods in rural environments. Sophia is, she's also a geographer, but she's working more on climate change, and Rehema, she's a former agronomist, and she's working on sustainability. So I've been discussing this to inform what we're going to present. So it's a known fact that big project, big infrastructure has an impact on biodiversity. And what I'm going to talk about is there are like direct and indirect effects, such as habitat loss, fragmentation, degradation, and also barriers to movement. And sometimes they argue that there are like some compensation that is possible, but we know that it doesn't, well, the literature is not really flattering about that. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So two of us, Birgit and I, have been working in the region for almost 30 years. And Rehema and Sophia have been like more or less for 10 years now. We did, as I said previously, field work during the construction of the Tren Maya, but there is no hard data to inform what I'm going to present today. But there is a lot of literature, you know. It's very well known what the effects are. So the region I'm going to talk about is centered on the Calakmul Biosphere Reserve, so it's the Calakmul region. That region is actually the largest tropical forest of Mexico. So along with the Balamku newly established biosphere reserve and Balanquin, it's 13,000 square kilometers. It's part of the Selva Maya, which is a very important chunk of tropical forest in, well, the northest big chunk of tropical forest in the Americas. And it's very important for biodiversity. For instance, we know that it holds, the Calakmul Biosphere Reserve holds the largest jaguar population. It also hosts some species that are endangered or rare, such as the Baird's tapir, king vulture, spider monkey, and so on. It's also home to many people. So now there are like almost 32,000 people there in 62 communities. So the biocultural part, actually, I'm not going to talk about it because it's more complicated than the rest. But these people, they're really, in their practice, they really relate a lot to natural resources. So there is an interesting biocultural diversity. Okay, so the impact that are known from such project are, the first impact is actually deforestation. So we know that deforestation, so it causes habitat loss, and we know that habitat loss is the main cause of extinction. But it is also the opportunity for new species in the system, so opportunistic species. Some of them are actually exotic. So it means that biodiversity is changing. It's not always decreasing, but it will be changing. And there is also fragmentation. So fragmentation is more subtle, but in particular, it increases the likelihood of negative interaction between wildlife and people. So it's known to increase hunting. It's known to increase also the access to livestock. So we had previously work showing that where you have more forest fragmentation, you have more risk of attack on livestock by jaguar and pumas, for instance. And other impacts, oops, too fast, okay. It's also forest degradation. So it's not forest degradation the way we were told about earlier. So in this case, in the case of the Tren Maya, it means actually increased access to the forest due to the railroad, to the road to the construction site, and also roads to the limestone pits. So here, for instance, on that picture, you can see, so this is the road. Oops. This is a train, and all these roads you see, they lead to the train, and here there is a limestone pit. So all this creates a network of access, and we know that with access we have more illegal activities, so more hunting, more illegal extraction of timber, for instance, and increased trafficking. So there was some evidence during the construction that this was going on, but it might have been an effect of a lot of people also being in the area just temporarily during the construction, because there were a lot of people present in the area. Who knows, but because these roads are still there, yeah, it will probably induce more of these forest degradation. And the kind of degradation we're speaking there, it's like deforestation or some change in forest composition. So, and the interaction you have, you know, the functionality of the forest, because some species are seed dispersers or seed predators, so it changes the dynamics inside the forest. Okay, and another known effect of roads and railroads are that they constitute barriers to the movements of species. So we know that there are like increased roadkills along railroads. There is not much information in the tropics, except for India. But in India, for instance, what is well known is the impact on elephants. Of course, we don't have elephants, but we know that species can cross, or they are attracted by resources growing along the railways. Also, there is a behavioral effect. So the species, even if they can fly or they can move, they will be reluctant to actually cross because they perceive a higher predation risk. So this is something, and sometimes it can be very narrow. It doesn't need to be hundreds of meters. It can be only like 10 meters. And most of these access routes, they're about that size. The railway, it's much wider. And then there is also what is known as cumulative effects of barriers. So it has been documented in Canada in particular, that when you have these utility lines and then you have a highway and then you have the railroad, all these barriers, they have a cumulative effect, and species are much less likely to cross and to disperse. And in Calakmul, this may be actually very important because there is, as you know, there is a gradient of precipitation, so it's drier in the north, and we know that some species are more likely to cross the road, for instance, when during the dry season. Probably because you have these movements of species going to where water is. So if you have this road that is already east-west and now you have the railroad, it might be critical actually for some species. Okay, so there are some offsets, and not the carbon offsets. We're speaking about the kind of compensation that they are like saying, but we know that these strategies, they're not really good because the ecosystem we're actually destroying to allow some development. Sometimes they're irreplaceable because it also changed the spatial configuration of the landscape, so it's not real. So in the area, they had like areas under payment for ecosystem services. This is what is, they call the modalidad Tren Maya. And in one of the ejidos that is along the railroad. And there was also, maybe some of you know that last year the Balam Ku Reserve, which was a state reserve, it was declared a biosphere reserve. So I didn't find any evidence that it was directly linked to the train, but I think it might have been some link. But officially there is nothing in the documents. So, okay, so there was, during the construction of the train, which it's finishing, right now, there was clearly high temporary impacts. So you could, people were telling you there were animals, you know, like wandering, and it's so exactly like after hurricane, for instance. But there are conditions that are created that probably indicate that the effects might be long-lasting. These direct and indirect effects I've been talking about. And then, because we have also climate change coming over that, the region is going to become like much drier. It might actually exacerbate the impact. And we have also, the train is also a source of water consumption. So for the train itself, but also for the population that they're trying to attract to work around the projects. It's not only, you know, transportation, it's tourism, development, etc. So this is going to probably create like a lot of competition for water. And there was supposedly impact assessment for the train, but one can really wonder if it was really done in a complete way, or if it was just, you know, to justify that. It's not a big deal because you're deforesting just a little bit of the forest without taking into account all the other effects. Okay.
We have a minute or two for one question, if anybody. So I have a question, if anybody has a question. So Sophie, so one of the things, obviously, about the train is the effect on biodiversity, and there is a lot of critiques for these kinds of infrastructure projects. But it's also sometimes the lack of recognition of how conservation also hasn't been necessarily very good at providing things to communities. So how you guys have been thinking about sort of those things, and I know that you have been thinking about it, like how you deal with the idea of, okay, communities need maybe access or transportation, but at the same time, we as people in, you know, caring for conservation, we're not necessarily providing those things that could keep or maintain. So how you guys are thinking about it?
Yeah, maybe Birgit can complete my answer, but yeah, so there were these things saying that people are going to be able to move locally, but we really question that because some of the movements, people locally, they want to go to the cabecera municipal. They don't want to go, you know, to the east or to the west necessarily. And then the project, we don't think it was made for the local people. You know, it was made to have like more development in the area, which is going to create, so we already sit in the villages around the railroad, so the price of land has been like exploding. So, and local people in some villages, it's not affordable anymore. So, even if you're from there, so I don't think it's really good what is coming from there. Birgit, you want to add something else?
Basically the same, if you then also look at the prices of the Tren Maya, I mean, it's incredibly expensive. And then where should people go? From Chetumal to Spujil, and what are the people doing living in the south? I mean, I agree, it's not made for local transport. It's made for transport of tourists, goods, and whatever interesting things. Anybody?
Thank you, Sophie. That was great. Okay, so our next presenter is Dr. Elena Lazos from UNAM, and she's going to continue with the Maya train. And from the title, you can see that maybe additional sort of critiques on this project. So, Elena, welcome.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm going to cause a rupture. ¿Quién no entiende español? ¿Todos entendemos español? Entonces me voy a pasar al español. De todos modos está la presentación en inglés por aquellos que tienen algún problema. Bueno, primero es el tren no maya, es decir, desde allí, desde el nombre, hay una desapropiación cultural, ¿no? Es decir, ¿por qué maya? ¿No? Si además en Yucatán lo maya ya está muerto, ¿no? Para ellos es lo mayero, son los campesinos, y son los mestizos, ¿no? Lo que se llaman mestizos, y lo que nosotros llamamos cultura maya. Entonces, desde ahí hay una discusión antropológica, social, histórica, ¿no? De la desapropiación y del uso del término maya. Pero, por otro lado, también es que no podemos entender la construcción del Tren Maya sin entender lo que está pasando con el corredor interoceánico. Entonces, aquí es lo que yo voy a unir, el corredor interoceánico junto, ¿no? Con el Tren Maya, y donde precisamente es la vida en venta, ¿no? Eso es quién da más, ¿no? Bueno, el objetivo de esta presentación precisamente era entender cómo los discursos, ¿no?, sobre la economía de las promesas tienen un efecto tanto en estas controversias de si es positivo o es negativo el Tren Maya. Y esto ha sido como en el eje de la discusión, ¿no? O sea, ¿vamos a ganar con el Tren Maya o vamos a perder el Tren Maya? Y nos podemos poner a discutir en términos de superficie o en términos de efectos en el agua. O sea, ya oímos, ¿no?, algunas de las exposiciones anteriores en las cuales nos están dando datos, ¿no? Pero también lo que tenemos que tener en cuenta es a qué tiempo, ¿no? A largo plazo, ¿qué son esos efectos de lo que nosotros introducimos como una infraestructura de desarrollo? Entonces, realmente la construcción de un tren Maya, ¿no?, y del corredor interoceánico realmente puede reducir la pobreza en la región, ¿no?, o puede estar borrando algunas de las desigualdades sociales. Y bueno, es ahí donde podemos acercarnos, ¿no?, tanto teórica como metodológicamente, en términos de la economía de las promesas, ¿no? Es decir, ¿qué quiere decir esas promesas? Y lo que se ha visto, ¿no?, es que lo han discutido mucho todo lo que los teóricos, ¿no?, que se dedican al Science and Technology Studies, ¿no?, y en las cuales lo que se ha visto es qué nos prometen esos futuros tecnológicos, ¿no? Hemos tenido muchísimas discusiones en México sobre los transgénicos, ¿no?, y es en eso que podemos también decir, bueno, ¿qué futuro nos están abogando, ¿no?, las tecnologías nuevas? Y también esto está relacionado mucho con lo que muchos de los sociólogos hablan de la sociología de las expectancias, ¿no?, o de las expectativas que generamos en la población. Y lo que vemos, ¿no?, es que realmente hay una promesa de bienestar, ¿no?, vendiendo lo que es la naturaleza, pero también vendiendo o comodificando, ¿no?, todo lo que significa la cultura o la cultura maya, ¿no? Ahora, entonces, lo que en esta parte de la economía de las promesas tenemos que demistificar qué son los planes de desarrollo, ¿no? Y lo que estamos proponiendo es que los planes de desarrollo precisamente no nos traen cambios, ¿no?, realmente político, económico, estructurales, y que la idea, ¿no?, de realmente reducir la pobreza a través de todos estos proyectos de desarrollo, lo que están haciendo es cada vez apoyar más al desarrollo del capitalismo en las regiones, incorporando, ¿no?, los nuevos territorios hacia el sistema mundial y reforzando, ¿no?, precisamente cuestiones de pobreza y cuestiones de desigualdad, y marginalizando sobre todo las posibilidades para ver otras alternativas de vida. Entonces, lo que estamos viendo es que, ¿no?, la pobreza, cuando lo analizamos por la economía, ¿no?, de las promesas, la pobreza no es una cuestión de escasez, ¿no? O sea, muchas veces se nos habla como escasez, ¿no?, y en eso no somos pobres porque no tenemos, ¿no? Pero más bien es resultado, ¿no?, de una estructura de poder donde marginaliza, ¿no?, aquella población, ¿no?, posible para estar participando en la toma de decisiones de qué es el devenir, ¿no? Y bueno, hay una cita, ¿no?, textual de Meta, ¿no?, que ya ha trabajado mucho toda la parte de la escasez, ¿no?, que siempre, ¿no?, cuando hablamos de escasez, entonces lo que hacemos es evocar, ¿no?, soluciones solamente para traer desarrollo, como si eso, ¿no?, mágicamente nos trajera o nos redujera la pobreza, ¿no? Y entonces, cuando estamos hablando de escasez, pues entonces nos olvidamos de todas las políticas de redistribución que deberíamos de enfocarnos, ¿no? Entonces, solamente estamos hablando de un desarrollo para poder traer, pero para poder traer supuestamente bienes o bienestar, sin realmente estar hablando de un proceso de quiénes están involucrados y cuáles son las políticas de distribución a las cuales nos estamos refiriendo, ¿no? Entonces, digamos, en el corredor interoceánico, como en el tren, ¿no?, Maya, lo que se está planteando es esta privatización de la naturaleza, es una privatización de los territorios, de la cultura y de la propia gente. Y bueno, ahí tenemos como 5 puntos, ¿no? En las cuales las promesas pues están basadas en este imaginario, ¿no? De lo cual, ¿no? Nos van a traer y por lo tanto va a haber una mejoría o un bienestar, ¿no? Y entonces siempre estamos pensando en términos de progreso o en términos de una modernización, lo cual, ¿no? Está en el discurso que cuando hay toda una parte del discurso de la escasez, pues el que nos van a traer progreso o el que nos van a traer la modernización queda en ese imaginario, ¿no? Y por eso se queda realmente a nivel cultural en las poblaciones. Las promesas tienen que ser, ¿no? Creíbles, ¿no? ¿Qué tanto nos van a atraer? Y donde lo que tenemos que tener en cuenta es que estos efectos son irreversibles, ¿no? Es decir, ya que entra, ¿no? Una infraestructura, una nueva tecnología, los efectos son irreversibles porque los que tenemos que ver es a largo plazo, no a cortos plazos solamente. Y donde las promesas entonces se transforman en estos drivers de cambio, ¿no? Que son muy fuertes en términos culturales, en términos económicos, en términos sociales. Ahora, la importancia de las mentiras, ¿no? De estas promesas, ¿no? Es decir, vas a tener, ¿no? O vas a tener un negocito, vas a poder abrir un changarrito, ¿no? Es decir, estas mentiras de estas promesas lo que hacen es permear precisamente el imaginario que está siempre basado en la economía de mercado. Es decir, yo voy a tener un poquito más y en las cuales entonces voy a salir de esa pobreza, ¿no? Sin embargo, lo que tendríamos que entender que cuando estamos, ¿no? Realmente impulsando cada vez más el mercado, lo que estamos haciendo es una transformación, una nueva configuración institucional entre las instituciones nacionales, las instituciones internacionales con el Estado, ¿no? Y en las cuales se crea una nueva estructura de poder, ¿no? Creo que ha habido, ¿no? Mucha discusión sobre lo que trae el neoliberalismo y para nada es un adelgazamiento del Estado, ¿no? Es un reforzamiento del Estado con una nueva reconfiguración a nivel del mercado, es decir, de las empresas, ¿no? Que están metidas ahí. Y ahora entonces, ¿cómo poder entender, ¿no? Cómo hay un favorecimiento solamente de algunas de estas actores, ¿no? Que se benefician de ese desarrollo y en las cuales pues, hay un enriquecimiento solamente de algunos de los actores. Ahora, cuando nos dicen que el Tren Maya, ¿no? O el corredor interoceánico es una propuesta nueva, pues no, tenemos que ir desde los años 70, ¿no? Donde ya desde López Portillo había este famoso plan Alfa Vega, después hubo el Plan Integral de Desarrollo para el Istmo, después el Plan Puebla-Panamá, que luchamos tanto contra el PPT, ¿no? El proyecto Mesoamérica de Calderón, las zonas económicas especiales de Peña Nieto y bueno, ahora es el programa para el desarrollo del Istmo de Tehuantepec de López Obrador, ¿no? Pero digamos, entonces estamos hablando de que ya desde entonces, ¿no? Había la posibilidad de convertir, ¿no? Salina Cruz, el corredor, en términos de la integración, ¿no? del sur de México en toda la parte, ¿no? Comercial, mundial, tanto de bienes como de servicios, ¿no? Igual, ¿no? El plan Puebla-Panamá transformando el territorio, ¿no? Transformando todo a través de la infraestructura, de las estrategias de comunicación, de actividades productivas, ¿no? Y sobre todo de siempre estar pensando en una comunicación entre Pacífico y Atlántico, ¿no? Me voy a saltar pero digamos, sigue siendo, ¿no? Las mismas políticas desde los diferentes, ¿no? Hasta que entramos en este sentido en el 2018-2024, en las cuales entonces tendríamos que entender que el Tren Maya forma parte, ¿no? De las políticas del corredor interoceánico, es decir, transformar a través de la mercantilización de todo, ¿no? Ese corredor transformando los territorios, es decir, en términos de que va a abrir totalmente la privatización de la tierra y en las cuales, si nosotros vemos, pues empezaba desde, ¿no? La ley de la antirreforma agraria, ¿no? Del 92, en las cuales, ¿no? Se empieza la privatización de las tierras en México. Y entonces, ¿no? Tenemos este tipo, ¿no? de discursos, ¿no? de AMLO, en las cuales, bueno, van a tener trabajo, ¿no? Va a ser opciones para que en vez de que los migrantes crucen nuestra frontera y entonces justificar nuestra política migratoria con Estados Unidos, va a haber parques industriales, para además, ¿no? el complejo quedará en manos de la Secretaría de Marina, ¿no? Lo cual esto también nos abre pues un gran peligro en términos de la militarización en México. Ahora, aquí solamente retomo, ¿no? porque no nos da tiempo de ir en todo, pero el discurso del por el bien de todos y primero los pobres, ¿no? en los cuales lo hemos oído muchas veces los mexicanos, ¿no? en las cuales entonces, ¿no? se nos va grabando, cada vez, ¿no? va permeando en ese imaginario de sí, ¿no? estoy convencido que todas estas obras de infraestructura son pues primero los pobres, ¿no? Pero, ¿no? y hay acusaciones que ¿no? nuestro presidente o expresidente Porfirio Díaz, ¿no? diciendo que pretendía adueñarse de los terrenos de la nación, ¿no? cuando ahorita vamos en el mismo camino, es decir, en adueñándonos de esos territorios, ¿no? y en las cuales entonces lo que vemos es nuestro compromiso es escuchar, atender, respetar a todos y todas, ¿no? Entonces aquí hay veces que podemos tener esta parte, ¿no? de las cuestiones participativas, ¿no? hay que escuchar a todos, pero ¿cómo escuchamos a todos? ¿Cómo realmente todos tienen voz o no todos tienen voz? Donde hay élites, ¿no? a las cuales se da la voz y otros no, inclusive entre las mismas comunidades, ¿no? Y bueno, hay algunas de las citas, ¿no? que yo tomé de cuando se hace el banderazo del Tren Maya en Palenque, ¿no? y en las cuales, ¿cuáles son realmente como los objetivos de lo del Tren Maya? ¿no? Y entonces es un acto de reivindicación al sureste, tenemos que actuar de otra manera, no saquear, ¿no? y en las cuales pues precisamente estas reformulaciones, ¿no? van cayendo en ese imaginario cultural y social y por lo tanto entonces nos lo vamos creyendo, ¿no? nos vamos creyendo y sobre todo cuando nos dicen que siempre han estado marginados los pobres y que esta es su oportunidad para entrar al desarrollo y al progreso, por lo tanto entonces estos discursos reverberan, ¿no? en términos de las propias reivindicaciones de los pueblos, ¿no? Entonces cuando decimos hubo una cooptación de las convocatorias participativas, de qué tanto se manejó, no se manejó, manipular, tenemos muchas versiones y claro, cada quien está viendo algunos de los otros puntos, pero en los cuales lo que hay que entender es cómo permean, ¿no? esta economía de promesas dentro de la población para entender por qué, ¿no? muchas de las poblaciones o muchas de las comunidades están en favor del Tren Maya, ¿no? Y bueno, yo solamente quería, porque ya nada más me dan 2 minutitos, de ver, ¿no? que precisamente quiénes intervinieron o quiénes están dirigiendo este Tren Maya y vemos todo, ¿no? la cantidad de empresarios, ¿no? en las cuales están, empresarios que además Jiménez Pons, él también estaba en el PRAM Puebla-Panamá, donde ¿no? sean alianzas entre los gobernadores, ¿no? donde, ay, perdón, donde no, Fernando Marín, ¿no? que es uno de los grandes empresarios que controlan toda la distribución en Quintana Roo de bienes vegetales, ¿no? Está Alfonso Romo, que era el ¿no? asesor de AMLO y en las cuales pues él está, ¿no? atrás de las empresas más fuertes que estuvieron financiando tramos, donde todas estas identidades tienen, ¿no? controversias en sí mismas, no hay un bloque de un gobierno en sí, no hay una heterogeneidad de procesos y eso es lo que deberíamos estar entendiendo y el papel de cada uno, ¿no? por ejemplo, de Pemex, del INPI, etcétera, ¿no? Y en las cuales entonces lo que vemos, ¿no? es que ya hay toda una repartición, pues inclusive, ¿no? del Golfo de México en términos de la repartición que hay, ¿no? de todas las empresas y entonces por eso yo decía hay que ver al interoceánico, ¿no? como parte del Tren Maya, porque vamos viendo cómo se van lotificando, ¿no? todos los, digamos, territorios, pero inclusive lotificando pues el mar. Y bueno, yo con esto Termino en términos de que no solamente hay esto, hay pueblos en resistencia, por supuesto, ¿no? Pero sin embargo, pues estos pueblos en resistencia no han sido controlados, han sido manipulados y han sido cooptados, ¿no? Yo con esto termino. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, Elena. Bueno, tenemos creo como 5 minutos antes de terminar la sesión completa y pues obviamente primero podemos empezar con preguntas para Elena, pero también quería de pronto ahora abrirlo al público un poco para ver si también tienen sus opiniones y algo de discusión, pero lo primero una pregunta de pronto para Elena específica. Ok. Birgit.
Tal vez es una pregunta tonta, pero ¿no realmente crees que el pueblo ya se ha dado cuenta y que simplemente, digamos, se juntan a estas mentiras porque algunos siempre ya luego tienen así como un beneficio, o sea, un subsidio o algo así, porque simplemente ya no lo puedo creer que después de tantos años, y sí hemos visto hablando con gente en Calakmul que básicamente te dicen esto, así es política, es política. Bueno, seguramente has escuchado esto miles de veces.
Yo creo que es muy controversial, ¿no? En el sentido que hay veces podemos decir, ya no lo creo más, pero tengo una esperanza, ¿no? Tengo una esperanza de cambio. Y eso es, digamos, en la economía de las promesas es eso, es una promesa y una esperanza de cambio, ¿no? Y entonces cuando tienes y juegas con las esperanzas de cambio, pues votas por eso, ¿no? O sea, si te están abriendo caminos de una esperanza frente a una situación que ha estado altamente, ¿no?, marginalizada, donde, ¿no?, ha habido, sí, cuestiones de desigualdades tan fuertes, pues siempre tienes esa esperanza de cambio, ¿no? Es fuerte, ¿no? Es fuerte.
Bueno, una pregunta aquí.
Hola, muchas gracias. ¿Cómo se construye evidencia para controlar la economía de las promesas?
Digamos ese nivel de análisis de discursos, ¿no? ¿Qué tanto los discursos permean en las comunidades, ¿no? Por ejemplo, cuando hubo supuestamente las convocatorias a la participación, ¿no? Y donde supuestamente, ¿no?, había, entonces tienes que ir analizando quiénes están participando, cómo se abrieron los foros de la participación o no, qué tanta información hubo antes, ¿no?, de la supuestamente votación, ¿no? Y entonces vamos viendo que hay toda una manipulación de esa información y después una justificación que se hace, ¿no? Sí, se ha analizado mucho con lo de los transgénicos, ¿no? Ahí es donde toda esta parte de la economía, porque también, o sea, cuando un campesino siempre está diciendo yo voy a probar, ¿no? Sea transgénico, sea variedad local o criolla o sea, ¿no? Entonces estoy probando, ¿no? Y en ese sentido de probar, pues hay esa generación precisamente de esa esperanza o de esa promesa de bienestar, ¿no?
Muchas gracias, Elena, es un placer escucharte siempre. Y solo quería añadir un poco al comentario de la compañera. A veces no es que la gente, y a ver si estás de acuerdo, no es solo que la gente se dé cuenta o no se dé cuenta. En alguna ponencia el día de ayer mostraban unas gráficas de cómo cada vez que hay elecciones aumenta el tren de darle cosas a la gente, ¿no? O sea, de dar dinero, de dar en especie, de dar lo que sea. Y en efecto, cuando estás en una situación tan restringida de tanta vulneración, marginalización histórica, bla, 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 pues no solo, o sea, es el discurso, es la esperanza, pero también es lo que hay. O sea, ¿de qué otra manera puedes acceder a estos recursos si no es cuando te los dan? Porque hay tantas barreras en el camino. Y yo creo que eso es súper importante porque hay muchas narrativas. Me encantó la ponencia, yo llevo discutiendo sobre esto como con varios colegas que creen que sí, el Tren Maya, que no sé qué. Y mis colegas ambientalistas, ecologistas o tal, es como, no, porque la selva, porque no sé qué, pero más allá de eso a mí me gusta la complejidad que hay detrás, ¿no? Cómo construimos estos discursos, cómo construimos la idea de, pues sí, a lo mejor a la comunidad no le gusta, pero la nueva generación está trabajando para el tren y son las chambas que hay. Y si no, pues recíbete drogas en la costa o haz alguna otra cosa, vete al narco. Entonces creo que no necesariamente es solo poder entender lo que está sucediendo, que hay gente que sí lo hace. Yo trabajo ahorita con la producción de maguey mezcal, con las comunidades que se dedican a la producción, y sí saben, y sí se dan cuenta, igual lo aprovechan, ¿no? O sea, es lo que hacemos nosotros, porque en la academia también caemos en el sistema y también creemos muchas fantasías, pero jugamos, ¿no? Entonces creo que sí, me gusta mucho tu crítica, muchas gracias, y solo quería añadir eso.
Gracias. ¿Quieres adicionar algo, Elena?
Perdón.
Listo. Ok, voy a hacer la última pregunta a este lado, porque creo que ya estamos sin tiempo.
Gracias. Muchas gracias, sobre todo por la reflexión que creo que dejas en el público. Y yo quisiera preguntarte cuál es tu punto de vista sobre estos mecanismos de resistencia que tienen los pueblos, sobre todo los pueblos del sur, que yo les comento que yo veo a un México dividido en tres partes. El México del norte, que es totalmente comercial, empresarial, donde si no hay un signo de pesos nada camina. Un México de la parte media, donde unos sí, otros no. Y un México en el sur, donde la prioridad de producción es la autosuficiencia y no precisamente el intercambio monetario. En Oaxaca particularmente hay todavía mercados en donde si dan las 5 de la tarde y los productores no vendieron lo que trajeron, van y hacen trueque. Y ellos regresan a sus casas con lo que necesitan, ¿no? Y este es un mecanismo, me parece a mí, de resistencia muy interesante. ¿Qué tanto crees que pueda permear en esto? Porque lo que dice es totalmente cierto, es una oportunidad y lo toman. Pero también tuve la oportunidad de estar en el Tren Maya platicando con algunas comunidades hace unos 2 meses y ellos están muy conscientes que fue una oportunidad como muy temporal de un trabajo que llegó, que para construir, etcétera, pero que quien va a aprovechar los locales en las terminales no son ellos, porque no tienen el capital para invertir en un local de esos, que por lo pronto, como no hay transporte hacia los pueblos, bueno, están las mototaxis, pero que en el momento en que se abra bien la ruta, también se les va a terminar, ¿no? Y hay toda una complejidad. Entonces, desde tu punto de vista, ¿qué tanto estos mecanismos que todavía conservan de subsistencia, de autosuficiencia y de autogestión, porque creo que a veces también los subestimamos, ¿no? Entonces, ¿qué tanto crees que pueden como mediar eso? Muchas gracias.
Sí, yo creo que precisamente, ¿no?, con proyectos grandes de desarrollo como tapan o enmascaran, ¿no?, todo lo que puede ser, ¿no? Y entonces no vemos todo lo que puede ser. Entonces ahí en todo lo que puede ser, pues hay 1000 alternativas que podrían ser este tipo de trueques, ¿no? O, digo, ya no me dio tiempo, pero todos estos pueblos de resistencia más que están sobre el Istmo, ¿no? Y desde Tehuantepec, Chimalapas, ¿no?, donde hay organizaciones fuertes, lo que han planteado es eso, otras alternativas del tejido de la vida, ¿no? Es decir, ¿por qué ir hacia solamente la monetarización de nuestra cultura? Que además, bueno, en el banderazo maya hubo terribles ¿no?, eventos culturales de risa, ¿no? O sea, pero también de degradación o de denigración cultural, ¿no? Pero entonces en ese sentido las alternativas se enmascaran y eso es lo que hay que dar flor, ¿no?, a que sí hay muchas alternativas a un Tren Maya, ¿no?
Bueno, ya creo que terminamos. Muchas gracias, Elena. Muchas gracias a los que presentaron hoy, a Luciana, Leonardo, Camila y Sofía. Por favor, if you want to continue the conversation, please go ahead. There's a lot of discussions. This is a really interesting theme, topic, so please continue. And thanks again.